He's getting older.
You gotta be vaping me!
Oh, hit the volume!
But not wiser.
Cut that bitch off!
This is The Lefty Show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Lefty Show. I am your host, Lefty. Glad to be here with all of you today, Tuesday, the 25th of November in the year of our Spaghetti Monster 2014. Welcome one, welcome all to the Lefty Show, episode number 114. I hope to put on a great show for you today. Sit back, relax, strap it down. We got a lot to talk about today. A lot of good stuff going to be covered. Thank you all for watching, liking, favoriting, subscribing on YouTube. YouTube.com/LeftyOX is where you can go to find the show in its YouTube formation. Thank you to all of you for following me on Twitter at Lefty643 is where you can do that. Thank you to everybody that has been donating to the show. I'mRaising.com/643 Productions is where you can do that. That's I'mRaising.com/643 Productions if you want to help out the show monetarily. Thank you to everybody that has been sharing the show and helping the show grow, doing your part by sharing the show with friends, family, and co-workers. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts for your PC, tablet, or mobile device. Just search The Lefty Show, Android, iOS, it does not matter. You will find us there. Be sure to subscribe to the feed and download all the episodes at your leisure. All right, yesterday, big news. Apologize, took a brief break over this week and into the weekend. Going to be doing some shows. I don't know if I'm going to be doing a Thanksgiving show. I don't know. We'll cover it later. Follow me on Twitter at Lefty643. We got to talk about Ferguson, America. I mean, internet, the earth, because I'm pretty sure there are people that listen to this show outside of America. Everybody, we need to talk about Ferguson, Missouri. Last night, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, or is it daylight time now? I always get those screwed up. CST, CDT. 8 o'clock Central Time in America. Prosecutor Bob McCullough, I believe, of the prosecutor's office in Ferguson, Missouri, announced the decision of the state grand jury's investigation into Darren Wilson, the police officer who earlier this summer shot dead an unarmed 18-year-old black male by the name of Mike Brown. Big Mike Brown, many people called him. And over the last couple of months, a grand jury has been meeting, deciding whether to charge Wilson with a crime, deciding whether to charge Darren Wilson with murder, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, some kind of crime in the performance of his duties that day. Because the fact was, the whittled down, the quick hit facts, Mike Brown was 18 years old. He was like 6'4", 300 pounds, but still 18 years old and unarmed. Darren Wilson, a police officer in an SUV with body armor and a gun, for some reason, we don't know at the time, had to kill or decided that he had to kill Mike Brown. Now, the question for the grand jury was not, and I need to repeat this because there's a lot of people that seem to get this messed up. The question the jury was tasked with answering was not whether Darren Wilson was guilty of murdering Mike Brown. That's not it at all. The grand jury was not tasked with determining guilt. The grand jury was tasked with deciding whether there was enough evidence to proceed with charges of Officer Darren Wilson. They were tasked with deciding, does the state have a case against Darren Wilson? That was the question. They weren't tasked with making a social statement. They weren't tasked with doing anything other than deciding whether the state of Missouri, the great state of Missouri, had a case, or if you want to get hyper-technical with it, was wronged, was victimized by the acts of Officer Darren Wilson. That's what they were charged or tasked with doing. Does the state, does the sovereign have a case against Darren Wilson for what he did that day? And they heard evidence. They were originally part of a hodgepodge of a grand jury hearing evidence for multiple cases. But then as summer started to turn into fall, the grand jury stopped hearing evidence for any case other than the Darren Wilson shooting of Mike Brown. For months, they have heard evidence. They have had evidence presented to them and taken testimony from people and heard it and deliberated on that evidence and testimony as to whether Darren Wilson, they believe, Darren Wilson committed a crime. They were not a finder of fact. They were just deciding, we think there is enough evidence to make a good trial out of this. We believe that the state was victimized. The state is the victim of Darren Wilson's acts, and that act is murder. Or that act is second-degree murder. Or that act is negligent homicide. Or that act is whatever, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, whatever. That is what we think. Here you go. And last night, the prosecutor revealed, as a mouthpiece for the grand jury. Okay? We needed to... Oh, he sounded like a defense attorney up there because he was relaying the grand jury's decision, you morons. That's why. He wasn't, oh, thank God we don't have to charge Darren Wilson. That's not what he was saying. The prosecutor is not acting in capacity to defend Darren Wilson. The prosecutor is relaying the thoughts of the grand jury, the decision that the grand jury came to, which embodies, we think this, we think that, we think this happened, given the evidence, thus, no charges against Darren Wilson. That's why. Oh, he sounded like a defense attorney. Oh, my God, it's injustice, injustice that the prosecutor sounded like a defense attorney. Injustice, injustice, injustice. Kiss my ass, you bunch of morons. God, I hate America. Hate America. Hate it. Hate the people. Y'all are dumb idiots. My God. And listen, I'm not a liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. I don't go in with any of that jive. I don't do that because I decide how I feel about things, and that, in toto, forms my ideology. My ideology does not influence how I feel about certain things. That's how I approach it. Too many people are like, well, I'm a liberal, so I believe this. No, you moron. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you feel. A lot of people, liberals, many of them, as a part of this case, feel they have, oh, well, I'm a liberal, so I got to believe that Darren Wilson was an evil fascist who just out to kill black people. Urgh. He's Hitler, literally Hitler, is what a lot of people would have you believe. And I hate that. Stop it. And I can understand, but I can understand why conservatives may have a tough time dealing with hardcore liberals. Because there's no logic. There's no logic. It's all fatalistic. It's all assumed. It's all sensationalized. Just today, somebody tweeted, well, oh my God, Officer Darren Wilson likened Mike Brown when he was shooting him to Hulk Hogan. Oh my God, look at the injustice. He said that Mike Brown went through a couple shots and kept coming at him. Oh my God, look at the injustice. Look at the impropriety. And I had to respond to the guy. I said, well, adrenaline is it's a hell of a substance. There are accounts of people doing incredible things when under the influence of nothing other than adrenaline. Now, Rodney King had PCP. He had adrenaline and PCP, which is not fair, but you look at Rodney King on PCP and adrenaline. Look what he was able to do. Those cops were just mercilessly trying to beat that man, and he would not go down. Imagine if 6 cops came at you with a billy club and tried to beat the crap out of you. How quick before, and you're just on the ground. You're like, done, I quit. But on nothing more than adrenaline and PCP, look what Rodney King was able to sustain. Not making a value judgment on whether the cop should have been tried, should have been executed, or anything like that. But just watch what that man was able to sustain given adrenaline and PCP. But oh my God, Darren Wilson alleged this. Darren Wilson said that. It's just, there's no reason. There's no rationality. There's no discourse. There is no chance for there to be any set of circumstances other than what people have preordained in their minds. And that has been my interaction with hardcore liberals on Twitter. I had to unfollow Chris Cluey, bitch, idiot guy that he is. My God, shut the hell up, man. You're not as smart as you think you are. Trust me. As somebody who's not as smart as he thinks he is, I can tell you, you are not as smart as you think you are. At all. Moron, bitch, Chris Cluey. Jesus Christ, man. Oh, look at this, look at that. That proves you. Just what are you talking about? This, that, the other thing. A child is dead. Why isn't he charged with a crime? Because the grand jury had evidence and they don't believe the sovereign has a case. That's why. Officer Darren Wilson not charged, not indicted on any crime. And there were multiple choices. It was like a multiple choice test for the grand jury. The prosecutor and the defense attorney, he was acting like a defense attorney. You know what? Listen, if McCullough was acting as a defense attorney, if you want to go down that route, if you honestly, if you hear anybody say, well, he had the mien of a defense attorney, look at this injustice. He must be the worst defense attorney ever. He sounded like a defense attorney for Darren Wilson. Really? Because that same defense attorney prompted 12 people with at least 4 separate felonies with which to charge Darren Wilson. A lot of people like to twist that up on you in the wake of this case. So they say, oh, well, you know. And of course, I guess I haven't said it outright. Darren Wilson not charged. They like to twist it up on you. They say, well, the prosecutor presented multiple charging instruments to the grand jury, and I've never heard of anything like that. Well, you know why? You know why that is? Because usually the prosecutor presents but one charging instrument. Here's the evidence. We think, or I think, this guy should be charged with, let's say, murder. First-degree murder. That's what we want to charge him with. Here's the charging instrument. Does this evidence fit this charge? Murder 1. And what you do then, when you do that, when you present but one charging instrument to a grand jury. Now, of course, the grand jury can go out and charge anything they want. They can just go, no, screw it, we're going to... But usually they take their leads from the prosecutor. And when the prosecutor presents but one charging instrument, it's like an ad lib of crime. You go, here you go. This evidence that I have presented to you, can you make that fit this one charge? And what you do is you force these people into a binary decision. It's either guilty or not guilty of murder 1. That's what you're doing. Makes it a lot harder to get an indictment based on the evidence if you present one option. Because then you have people, well, I don't know if it's murder 1, and we only have murder 1 as an option, so no. But when you have murder 1, murder 2, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, 4 or more choices, 4 or more different charging instruments, does this evidence fit any of these? That's what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. That's what happened. The prosecutor presented the evidence. Now, I don't know, we'll get to bias and presentation and all that. But let's assume, for the moment, for the sake of argument, that all the evidence was presented, some 70 hours of testimony and evidence and blah, 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 blah. And the 12 people, 9 white, 3 black, those 12 people heard all that evidence and then were given multiple charging instruments. And the prosecutor said, well, I have presented to you all this evidence of what happened that day with respect to Darren Wilson and Mike Brown. Does that fit? You can charge him with murder 1, and here's what murder 1 is, blah, blah, blah. You can charge him with second-degree murder. Here's that charging instrument, which you can fill out and sign, or however it's done specifically in the state of Missouri. Here's that. Here's manslaughter. Here is a charge of manslaughter. Here's what that would be. Here's that charging instrument. And here's involuntary manslaughter. Here you go. All felonies. There you go. To me, that sounds a whole lot better than trying to make a grand jury shoehorn evidence into one charge, whatever it is. And pray tell, what would be the response? Let's assume that the prosecutor did what everybody, he was acting in defense of Darren Wilson because he presented multiple charging instruments. That's unheard of. He should have just done it the regular way. Okay. What if he did just one and they decided to not indict? No true bill. What would the response be then? Do you think it's possible that the response would be, well, he only presented them with one charge, and of course, if you present people with only one option given the evidence, maybe there was other things that he could have been charged with, but the prosecutor opted to go for murder one and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. How many times have you heard that? Well, he could have been charged with something, but the prosecutor wanted to go for the biggest and baddest to get his name in the paper or this or that, and the grand jury didn't buy it, or the jury at trial didn't buy it, and so the guy got off. How many times have you heard that? It happened with OJ. It happened with OJ. The prosecutor wanted to go biggest, baddest, hardest as he can, and the jury didn't buy it. This, honestly, if you are taking an honest, rational look, now keep in mind, this is coming from somebody who believed that Darren Wilson, and still believes that Darren Wilson did something wrong. Something. Was it murder? I don't know. I didn't see all the evidence. The more and more I see of it, the more and more I realize it probably wasn't murder. It's not murder. Whatever he did wrong, whatever it was, it ain't murder. Darren Wilson committed homicide, actus rea, but the mens rea was not commensurate with murder. It wasn't. It's just not. If you look at the evidence, the abrasions to his cheek, and yes, they are abrasions, not just rosy cheeks, the knot on the back of his skull, or the abrasion on the back of his skull, the DNA, Mike Brown's DNA on his uniform, all over his uniform, the damage to the inside of the vehicle, and the blood trail, Mike Brown's blood trail that goes one way and then circles back, which indicates that at some point Mike Brown stopped, turned, and started going towards Darren Wilson again. How fast? I don't know. But he did go towards him. Not like he stopped, turned with his hands up, and got shot dead where he stood, which is what many people would have had you believe day one. That he just stopped, turned, put his hands up, and then Darren Wilson, militaristic police fascist biatch, put 12 in him. That's not what happened. The blood trails indicate that there was a scuffle inside the car. Mike Brown started bleeding, started running away or moving away from Darren Wilson's car. He stopped, turned, and then came back. And then he died. That's where he died. All right. That's a little bit different than what many people say. Oh, yeah. Not murder. This is coming from somebody who believes that Darren Wilson did something wrong. And I don't see the problem with the process. If you've got something, anything, give it to me. Give me the prosecutorial misconduct. Let's get back to that. A lot of people are going to argue, well, it's an injustice because it's a systemically racist system. Oh, really? Well, what was racist specifically about this grand jury proceeding? Please tell me. I want to know if there's something wrong, because keep in mind, it is possible that the prosecutor was biased. Oh, we're not gonna charge one of our own. We just can't have that happen. And it is possible that the grand jury, the 9 white people on the grand jury, were racist crackers. That's entirely possible. Show me your evidence. Please. I want to see it. Until then, the grand jury proceeding was not racist and is above repute. Until you show me anything. Show me text messages from the guy to his wife or his bimbo, from the prosecutor saying, I really don't want to charge Darren Wilson because he got one of them and I don't like him. Show me that. Then you've got the federal government. Then the federal government's involved. Yay. But is there any of that? Are there any murmurs of that? That the prosecutor didn't present the evidence unbiased? There was heavy bias. or intentionally withheld evidence, only presented exculpatory evidence of Darren Wilson? Is there any evidence of that? Direct evidence, not just, well, the prosecutor's family are all police officers and, oh, there's 9 white people on the grand jury. Don't give me any of that crap. No. I mean direct, hard evidence. Do you have anything? A paper trail, emails, phone calls, text messages, something, Facebook posts. I don't care. Anything? No? Oh, huh. So then what's racist about this process? About this specific process? Well, we're not talking about the justice system at large right now, because that's an entirely separate can of worms, and I honestly view any attempt to, well, now let's have a talk about the justice system, the judicial system, and how it's racist. You're pettifogging. Stop it. We're here to talk about Darren Wilson and the grand jury and that process as it pertains to Mike Brown. Does anybody have any direct evidence that the process was inherently biased, inherently racist, or inherently anything else? Any direct evidence? Anything at all? Please give it to me. Because I think Darren Wilson did something wrong. Again, not murder, but I think he did something wrong. Please show me something. Nothing? Well, what do you say to that? How can you honestly stare that in the face and still scream injustice? Injustice. Well, what was wrong about the process? What was wrong about the decision? And I told people weeks ago. This was somebody originally when the news broke. I was, oh man, that's bad. And then as I paid attention more and more and more, I realized, it's entirely possible that Darren Wilson, there is not enough evidence to charge Darren Wilson with a crime. It's entirely possible. It is entirely possible, and indeed plausible, that Mike Brown put Officer Darren Wilson in reasonable fear of his life. That is entirely possible. And that there is no evidence that Officer Darren Wilson's fear for his life and thus his use of lethal force was criminal. It's entirely possible, indeed plausible, that is the case. And that's what happened on Monday night. But people won't accept that. It's an injustice. It's an injustice. Look at this, look at that. And I just want to know. I just want to ask people. All these people that are so outraged, look at how glaring of an issue this is. All I want to know is, in your mind, as somebody who believes that there was an injustice perpetrated on Mike Brown's family, on the black community of Ferguson, Missouri, on the people at large of the United States of America, if you believe that, I just want to ask you, is it possible that the evidence presented to the grand jury painted a different picture than what you read in the media? Is it possible? Is it indeed possible that Darren Wilson was in reasonable fear of his life when he shot Mike Brown? Is that possible? Now that we've decided it's possible, or hopefully we've decided it's possible, because if you say, no, it's not possible, well, then I'd like to see your evidence. I want to see your evidence, and I want to see the evidence pulled from what was presented to the grand jury. Show me that. Where is it? Because I see Darren Wilson with abrasions on his face and skull. I see Mike Brown's DNA. I see the blood trail that indicates that Mike Brown ran away, turned around, and ran back. Or moved away, turned around, and moved back. I don't know speed. I don't know if they can determine that. Which is consistent with what Darren Wilson said. And I also know that many of the witnesses, many of the, quote, eyewitnesses, multiple people who said this, that, and the other thing about what they saw that day, which paints the picture of Darren Wilson murdering Mike Brown, those people recanted their testimony in front of the grand jury. Recanted it. Changed it, and then recanted it, or were otherwise directly contradicted by the physical evidence. Some people honestly admitted. People, I can't believe it. And this is the thing. And well, we can't really talk about this. This is McClellan saying Some people even admitted that they did not witness the event at all, but repeated what they had heard in the neighborhood. That's what people testified to in front of the grand jury. Those same people that were trotted out by The Independent, by Huffington Post, by CNN, MSNBC, those same people whose testimony pre-grand jury was trotted out, say, look at Darren Wilson, how he murdered Mike Brown. Those same people, some of them, more than one, a non-zero number of those people, a non-zero, non-negative number of those people, admitted in the grand jury when they were testifying that they actually did not see what they told others they saw. They lied. Oh, they lied. They lied about what they saw. Other people still, whose testimony painted a picture of Darren Wilson murdering Mike Brown, were directly refuted by the physical evidence. And I ask you again, when you take all of that together, is it possible that Darren Wilson was in reasonable fear of his life? And what's more, is it possible that there was not enough evidence to bother charging Darren Wilson with murder, or murder two, or manslaughter, or involuntary manslaughter? Is it possible? It better be. I would surely hope so. And the worst part, I said at the top of the show, I hate Americans. I hate many people in this country. The worst part is there are people that say, yes, it's impossible. There are people who have convinced themselves, the echo chamber that is social media and liberal discourse to a certain extent. That echo chamber has convinced people that it is utterly impossible for Darren Wilson to not have murdered Mike Brown. And that's sad. That's the travesty. That's the injustice. Justice was served Monday night. That's justice. That is the system that we all subscribe to. That system of rule of law, the grand jury proceeding. The grand jury proceeding was even more slanted towards charging the guy with anything than your normal grand jury proceeding. Prosecutors say, hey, sir, charge him with anything. Here it is. Here's 4 different charging instruments or more. Here you go. Please. I'm basically, essentially, effectively begging them to charge him with something. Here are all of these different charging instruments. Go ahead. Begging them to be a runaway grand jury. Begging them to be that. And yet they still didn't do it. Now, that doesn't completely rule out that they were racist crackers and the evidence wasn't presented with fervor or was biased and da-da-da-da-da. That doesn't rule that out completely. And if you want to call this hedging my bets, fine. But barring some direct evidence of some kind of inherent active bias on the part of either grand jury panelists or the prosecutor, barring that, I don't see how you have a problem with this process. Because if you were going to be charged with a crime, you'd want the exact same process. The exact same one. In fact, actually, no, you wouldn't. You'd want the one where the prosecutor tries for the highest and best and hardest charging instrument and then gave the grand jury the evidence and said, hey, can you make this fit? That's what you'd want, because that increases your chances that they won't charge you with anything. You would want a jury of supposedly impartial people hearing evidence and deciding whether to charge you. We should not reinforce this idea that we can just go around trying people for murder because I've convinced myself that Darren Wilson killed Mike Brown. It's sad. It's really, my chair's squeaky, this fucking thing. I swear. You know, you spend $250 on a chair. You're like, I'm going to get this is a nice chair. Oh, no. Bastards. Need one of what's one of those chairs called? What's the ones that DX Racer? Is that the ones that's sponsoring all the gaming YouTubers? Need one of those. Oh my God, I need that. I just don't see how people can be so completely, so glib about short-circuiting, about subjugating the judicial process. Because you, in order to believe that this was a farce, that this grand jury test thing was a farce, you have to believe that the 70 hours or whatever it was of testimony and evidence presentation were all lies. You have to assume that the 9 people on the jury were all country-ass crackers who weren't going to charge him with anything because he finally got one of the black people. Yay, Darren Wilson. You have to believe all that. Do you have, and then I ask, do you have any evidence of it? Because I don't believe, I'm not so conceited to say, well, it's totally impossible that could happen. Okay, where's your evidence? What do you got? Direct evidence, please. What do you have? Anything? No? Huh. Well, then it sounds a whole lot like you just don't like this decision. And that's what it is. People don't like this decision. Okay. Well, that doesn't change anything. Just because you don't like it doesn't change anything about what actually happened, what evidence actually was available, and what that evidence actually portrayed. Because if you're a reasonable, rational person, you were preparing for this. If you are a reasonable, rational person, you were prepared for the notion that, this evidence might not be what I think it is. I may not have such a grasp, such a firm grasp on this evidence as I thought I did. If you're a reasonable person, that's what you thought. How many people on Twitter have you seen? How many people on Facebook, Reddit, Tumblr, wherever you go? How many people looked at that, said, well, I thought Darren Wilson did something wrong, but I trust in the process, and I have no evidence, direct evidence to completely distrust this specific process. So, I think I have to trust that the grand jury saw more and better evidence than I did. How many people have you seen saying that? I said it. I said it again. I think Darren Wilson did something wrong. Darren Wilson cannot be a police officer. Can't. No more. You're not a police officer anymore. You cannot allow that. You cannot give that guy his badge and his gun back and send him out walking the streets. You can't do it. Because while the evidence did not point to murder, I don't think we were at the point of George Zimmerman where Trayvon Martin was on top of George Zimmerman raining blows down upon him. That's not what happened. Darren Wilson, took a couple of shots from Mike Brown inside his SUV. And Mike Brown reached for his gun, but he didn't get his gun. And he stepped away. Walked away. Then Darren Wilson drew down on him. And from, depending, what is it, 90, 100-something feet, from 100-something feet away, a 300-pound guy starts running at you. When you are next to your 5,000-pound vehicle, 4,000-pound vehicle, don't you get in your car? You're a police officer. The guy's unarmed. I mean, he's a big dude, can beat you up. Yeah, okay. But get in your car and drive away. You're a police officer. You are supposed to be more of a sponge. You're supposed to take a bit of a beating from people. Physical, mental, verbal, whatever. That's part of your job as a police officer. You can't just go drawing down on and shooting people just because your tactics say it's okay. Those aren't police officers I want. I'll train you to, when you draw down on somebody and you shoot, all right, go ahead, shoot, center mass, go for it. All right, but you better be really sure when you pull that weapon out of your holster. Really, really, really sure, and really, really, really in danger. I mean, our departmental procedures will say if you're in reasonable fear of your life, okay, but I want you to go a step beyond that. I go, well, even if the guy's saying, I was standing 10 feet away saying, I'm going to stab you with this knife now, you don't draw down and shoot him. That's the kind of police officers I want. Darren Wilson cannot be a police officer anymore. But how many people are honestly saying, well, I think Darren Wilson did something wrong, but I trust that the grand jury saw more and better evidence than I did, and barring a complete, some direct evidence of bias that and racism that we haven't seen yet, barring that, I think they made the right decision based on the evidence. Do you see a lot of that? You hear it from me because that's what I think. I thought something was wrong. Something there happened that day that wasn't, no, it's not good. From the perspective of Darren Wilson, something wasn't right there. Something's not good. No, man. I don't know. Doesn't seem right. I think he did something wrong there. But it wasn't murder. Wasn't murder too. Wasn't manslaughter. And it wasn't involuntary manslaughter. Darren Wilson didn't commit those crimes. I don't think, given the slow trickle of evidence that I've seen now from the grand jury. It looks like, no, it doesn't look like he committed those crimes. All right. Well, he's not a murderer. Still shouldn't be a police officer, but I trust that the grand jury, were there actual evidence that pointed to murder, they would have indicted him on murder charges. But it looks like there wasn't. Other people are convinced that there was a murder, but have yet to produce evidence that there was. And it's so sad. What's really sad is that it's a commentary on discourse in our country. That even people, I mentioned Chris Cluey, I've just completely written him off as an idiot bitch now in my mind. Chris Cluey, people like that who just want to paint themselves as, oh, I'm the one engaging in discourse. I just want to engage with discourse with people on these issues. I want to be the elder statesman of this and that and the other thing, of these social issues, not just speak from fatalistic, assumed points and condescendingly, authoritatively speak down to people and say, this is the way things are, la, 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 la. I love discourse. Those same people are, murder, it was murder, injustice. You say, well, what evidence do you have of that? Well, it's just a child is dead and you got to try people for murder now. Wow. Okay. All right, I guess. That doesn't sound a whole lot like discourse in my mind. That sounds like you've just made up your mind that Darren Wilson committed a crime, specifically the crime of murder, and you want him tried for that. Okay, but don't pretend that you're doing anything other than what other people have done. Don't pretend that you're, I'm somebody who's going to talk about the issues. No, you're just going to make up your mind like every other insolent bitch out there. Just going to make it, I'm a pinheaded moron and I've made up my mind about this. That's all you are. You're just a pinheaded moron. Okay, lots of pinheaded morons out there. This is a show put on by a pinheaded moron. I've made a show completely about being a pinheaded moron. It's okay. But don't pretend you're anything special. It's really sad that there isn't a discussion about this. If you are sensationalistic and saying Darren Wilson got away with murder, or you're a racist. There's no middle ground. Either you are saying Darren Wilson murdered Mike Brown that day, or you're a racist perpetuating the police state. There's absolutely no middle ground. No room for discussion. Saying, well, what evidence do you have that this and that and the other? I've covered it all. The evidence didn't portray murder. And you have to trust that the grand jury saw it. Well, I don't trust that they did. Okay, do you have any direct evidence that of anything? Well, no. Well, then what the hell? What do you want? Just a bunch of people. Here's what it is. It's a bunch of people who want to be upset. They want to be upset about something. Because there are bad police. We do live in a militaristic, bordering on police state. We do live in that. And people want to be mad about it. They want to find something specific to be mad about, not just raging against the dying of the light, the generalists, the general nature of it all, the general unfairness of it all. They want to find something specific and narrow to say this is in the embodiment of all the things that I don't like that are wrong with this country, et cetera, et cetera. They want that. And they projected it onto Darren Wilson's interaction with Mike Brown earlier this summer. You know what? The evidence didn't support that. There are plenty of other cases of police murdering people. Plenty of it. Plenty of instances of police murdering what had previously been nonviolent people. Plenty of evidence of that. Go be mad at those situations. Now, one of them was a crazy white bum in the foothills of Tucson, which doesn't really have it doesn't ring your bell like black kid, white cop. Doesn't really ring your bell that way, but that's actually police murdering people. This, it wasn't. The evidence didn't bear that out. And you don't have any unless you have any direct evidence otherwise, the grand jury made the right decision. And the grand jury made a decision that is in keeping with our judicial process. And I just want to close out. I'll close out the show by saying this. If you're rioting about this, if you riot, not protest, or different things, if you riot about this, you're a criminal and nothing more. I want you handcuffed, perp walked, put in prison. I don't care the color of your skin. Doesn't matter to me. If you are rioting because of this, because you're so mad at the outrage and da-da-da-da-da, I don't care about the disparity, the number of black people in prison or the school to prison pipeline. I don't care about any of that crap. About how mad you are about it. If you're destroying other people's property because you are upset about the decision not to charge Darren Wilson with murder, you are a criminal. That's it. And that's all. You're not an activist. You're not a protester. You're not fighting the good fight. You are a criminal. Let's bring it up. Another great episode of The Lefty Show. I thank you all for joining. I had a great time putting on the show for you. I hope you had a great time listening. Thank you to everybody for liking, favoriting, subscribing on YouTube. YouTube.com/LeftyOX is where you can find the show in its YouTube formation. You can also find plenty of gaming content there. Head on over to YouTube.com/LeftyOX for glorious 1080p resolution gaming videos at buttery smooth 60 frames per second frame rates. Thank you to everybody for following me on Twitter at Lefty643 is where you can do that. Stay up to date on all the latest and greatest Lefty Show news. Thank you to everybody for for donating to the show. I'm raising.com/643 Productions is where you can do that. Thank you to everybody that's been sharing the show with friends, family, and co-workers, helping the show grow. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts for your PC, tablet, or mobile device. Android, iOS, it doesn't matter. Just search The Lefty Show. Thank you to everybody for joining. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you next time. I'm out. Peace.
Welcome to Con Air.